All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's afternoon. Yes, it's noon. So good afternoon. Welcome to Real Talk. My name is Norma Fran. And if you're just finding me, I am a life coach and integrative nutrition coach. And I'm also the founder of the Weight Loss Your Way podcast and community membership. And within my private coaching practice, I primarily work with women who are really just done with dieting and ready to learn a way to lose weight that works for their lives. This more holistic approach that's actually a sustainable approach. And it really has less to do with the food you're putting on the plate and more to do with how you're thinking about yourself and your process and all the things. So I come on here live every Wednesday at noon, or almost every Wednesday. I think I missed last week to talk about just that, about some of the things that you can do to help navigate that process of figuring out weight loss your way, and to just share some tips and some general, I don't know, guidance, I guess, on how to start changing the way you think about weight loss. Because we've been conditioned to believe it is way harder than it has to be, and that we need somebody else to tell us how to do it. And that's the big thing. We just don't. We know what to do. We've just been trained and conditioned to rely on somebody else's diet or meal plan or program to tell us what to eat and when and how much, that we've just kind of lost touch a little bit with ourselves and knowing what is right for us. So that's a little bit about what we talk about here. So today, I wanted to go a little bit deeper into this whole idea of the relationship we have with food, because we all have one, whether we know it or not. All right. There's a little fly in my office and it's buzzing around my head and it's driving me crazy. So I'm going to try not to be doing this all through the whole broadcast, but all right, let's just stay focused. Okay, so here we go. I am live here in my Facebook page and also over on YouTube. So if you have any questions, please feel free to just checking to see who's here. Please feel free to pop them in the comments and I will try to keep my eye on them. If I keep looking over here, that's what I'm doing, and try to answer them as we go. And then if you happen to be watching on replay, do the same. Questions or comments, drop them right in and I will come back to you personally and respond. All right, so let's dive in. So the first handful of these real talks that I've done starting back in late February, early March, was really all about being intentional with your food choices and how that daily food plan, I spent a couple of weeks talking about that, could be a really helpful tool. So if you're either in Facebook or YouTube, you can find those replays and they're all labeled Real Talk and it's number 1 through 8. And you'll find all of the different replays if you wanted to go back and dig into those things. So I also touched on how we can change our thinking about food and this good and bad food list that we also all have, and how that kind of impacts your relationship with food. So we need to get to a place where if food isn't good or bad and no food's off limits anymore and you're not restricting, what are you doing? You may be asking yourself, well, how the heck am I supposed to lose weight if I'm not doing any of those things? Well, here's what I want to be very clear about. All of that's true. You can lose weight without the food labels and without restricting and without having a big list of foods that are off limits. It is possible. But what it doesn't mean is that you get to keep your old mindset around your eating behaviors. It means that in order to have that freedom from food, you have to learn to become more mindful or intentional about your eating behaviors. And again, that's part of that process. That daily food plan is an amazing tool to help you do that, to be really intentional about your choices. Today, I want to go a little bit deeper into this idea of mindfulness and go like kind of to the next step. So if you've been practicing writing the daily food plan, you're probably well on your way to becoming more mindful about the foods you are eating. The daily food plan, again, is that perfect tool that's going to help you make those choices. But intentionality and mindfulness doesn't stop there, not with your food choices. Now you get to add on a new layer of intentionality. And that's really learning a little bit more about your body's hunger signals and the cues that it gives you when it's had enough. When you're no longer hungry and you can stop eating now because your body will tell you those things. Most of us, myself included, have really lost touch with that, and it's the paying attention to those things that's going to help you recognize them quicker and then be very intentional. So, sounds simple enough, but it is a simple concept, this whole idea of eating when you're hungry and stopping when you've had enough, but it's not always easy to implement. And here's why. It's really good reasons for this. Throughout your entire life, you've probably learned eating behaviors that have nothing to do with the feeling of being physically hungry or satisfied or like you've had enough. You've heard things like clean your plate, 3 square meals a day, eat your veggies and then you get dessert, or breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Don't waste food. So these are all things that we learn probably as a child. And my favorite one, that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Do you know where that first came from? I was fascinated when I heard this. It was a slogan that the Kellogg's company came out with, I think in like the late 1800s when they were introducing cornflakes. That was their slogan, and breakfast is the most important meal of the day, stuck to us like glue. So I think that's just really fascinating. Now I know there's scientific evidence to show that yes, breakfast is really important, but that's where that came from. It was just somebody's slogan for an advertising campaign. But anyway, we were literally conditioned to not listen to our bodies at a very early age with all these kind of rules. And certainly no harm intended. That's just how most of us were raised, with those kind of things like cleaning your plate and don't waste the food. Now, the other reason listening to our physical signals of hunger and satisfaction, the other reason it's hard is because many of us, especially if you've dieted for a long time, we've trained ourselves to be hungry most of the time. And we've probably gotten really used to that feeling of hunger that, frankly, depending on how restrictive you're being, is probably like bordering on starvation, that kind of hangry feeling that you get. And when you come to believe that it's a required feeling, that feeling of hunger that you have to have in order to lose weight, or if you're somebody that's living in a larger body, you might believe that that is just how you're supposed to feel because you shouldn't be this size or you should lose weight. So maybe you're not feeding yourself enough and you're just used to being hungry all the time. So you've lost a little bit of touch with what those feelings of hungry and satisfaction actually feel like. So the flip side of that though is fearing hunger and eating to stay full or have that full feeling most of the time because we're fearful of being hungry for some of the same reasons, from years of restrictive dieting or whatever that you've been doing in an attempt to lose weight. Maybe you're just someone who has just, and I use this, I don't want to use this word lightly, but maybe traumatized by the whole diet experience, and you're just very fearful of being hungry, and that's normal too. So there's also this element too, I think that a lot of us might experience this, that there could also be a little bit of, some leftover experiential things we carry around with us. Like when I was growing up, we were we were pretty poor when I was growing up, and I was fortunate that we always had a meal on the table, and my mom made sure of that, but there was always just enough. And there were never seconds or leftovers. And on that special occasion when there was a dinner roll or 2 left over, looking back, it almost felt like everybody was, like, eyeballing that 1 extra roll and wondering who was gonna be the lucky winner. And it was usually the one who ate really, really fast because somebody made the comment like, "Oh my gosh, you must be starving. Go ahead, have that extra roll." So guess who learned how to eat fast? That was where I think it came from. So there's these behaviors that we learn just by living our lives around our eating that's moved us away from being very intentional about it. So, but there's good news. A learned behavior can be unlearned. So there might be a lot of stuff there though to unwind. And when it comes to listening to your bodies and knowing that you're actually hungry or when you've had enough. So let's spend just a minute or two on that other side of hunger, which is enough. Now it's we're used to, I think, generally speaking, we've been trained to eat more than our body needs. So we eat until we're full. And you know what I mean by that full feeling, that like push yourself back from the table and unbutton your pants and take a nap kind of full. We live in this supersized world, and it's no wonder that, people I've worked with, myself included, were shocked when they start to pay attention and see how little food they actually need to feel satisfied. Because we've just gotten so used to these big, large portions, and bigger is better. So, this is a part of the process as you're working through getting to understand what the feeling of enough feels like. It could be a little shocking that, wow, it didn't take nearly as much as I had been eating. So, the other thing you might come up against if you are a member of the Clean Your Plate Club, which so many of us are, that might add on another layer of guilt if you're trying to listen to your body and stop it enough, because you've just got it so deeply ingrained that it's not a good thing to waste food. You shouldn't throw things away. But stopping at enough, in and of itself is a process. So part of that process is getting okay with maybe sometimes scraping your plate in the garbage, or maybe taking a doggy bag, or getting really good at eating leftovers, because you're going to learn that your body just doesn't need so much food. So that's one area that's kind of a bit of a watch out, that clean the plate club mentality that happens. But one thing that is really helpful when you're trying to figure out when you've had enough is in the moment, in slowing down and really paying attention to those physical cues that you think have been, those physical cues that you may not have seen before. Sorry, I just wanted to check my comments over there. Um, Little things that you may not have ever noticed, like think about like the last meal you ate. At some point in that meal, did you catch yourself kind of poking around your plate looking for the last of the good stuff? That's usually a sign that your body's had enough food. Have you ever felt a little bit distracted and you get in a conversation and kind of realize that you stopped eating? That's usually your body's just a naturally letting you know that it's had enough. Um, some people have a little sigh, like that, whew, like, okay, that's enough. I've had enough. The thing that gets me all the time is when I catch myself questioning if I've had enough in my head. And when I'm asking the question, I usually almost always have had enough and I stop. But it's not as easy as it sounds sometimes, because darn, that food tastes really, really good. So there's lots of things though that you can do to work your way towards it, kind of baby step. So getting used to recognizing that feeling of enough might, a good way to do that is just to, when you sit down with your meal, just consciously be prepared just to stop for like a minute, 90 seconds. Just put your fork down and just do a quick body scan. How do you feel? Do you feel like, yeah, this feels pretty good? Or do you still feel a little hungry? And if you do, eat another half of whatever's on your plate and stop again and just keep assessing. Nobody has to know what you're doing. You can just do this quietly and just feel what's happening in your body, and then just stop. Now, if you stop too soon and you're hungry an hour later, that's okay. It's a process. You can always eat more. That's one thing that really helped me kind of figure that out, is knowing that I'm not slamming the door on food for the rest of my life. I'm just stopping at this meal, and I can go back if I'm hungry. Let's see. Let me quickly look at my notes real quick. So go over there. All right. So, what can you do maybe before the meal? This I found to be really, really helpful because this seems to be the thing that I know I struggled with the most, and many of my clients do too, is that stopping it enough. Or mostly, I think people find it a little easier to recognize actual hunger, but that stopping it enough, that's a big one. So there's some things you can do before you sit down. Have some kind of thought redirects locked and loaded and ready to go. Will probably have a good sense of the thoughts that are going to come up for you. Like for me, it's like, oh, this tastes so good. I don't want to stop. Um, so maybe, my redirect sometimes is I get to have it again whenever I want. I can plan it for tomorrow. And it takes a little bit of that pressure off. If you are someone that is just really struggling with the idea of wasting food, maybe redirect that thought a little bit and say, I'm either going to waste it in the garbage or I'm going to waste it on my body because I'm going to give my body more food than it needs. That one always helped me as well. It just kind of put it in perspective a little different. Now, another one that I hear a lot is kind of the part of your diet brain that just wants to get a little whiny about this whole thing and like try to offer up, oh, this isn't fair. I wish I could just keep eating. I don't need to do this. If you hear that kind of chatter going on in your head, it's also not fair to your body to make it work so hard to process more than it needs. That also is kind of a little bit of a perspective shift. So, if you have an idea of what's going to come up for you when you try to stop eating, when maybe you want to keep going, think about it in advance, prepare these little redirects, and I think that will help at least ease you through the first part of it until you get a little bit better at recognizing those signals. All right. So, what else can I give you for advice? How about this? This might be a little too woo for some people, but I promise you it works. If you are really interested in understanding when you've had enough and stopping at enough rather than overeating at your meals, try a little visualization exercise before you sit down to that meal. And I know this sounds a little woo, but stay with me. Imagine yourself eating your meal, and at some point you're checking in with how you feel, and you notice that you feel like you've had enough and you're going to decide to stop eating. Visualize everything. Visualize yourself getting up from the table, taking your plate to the kitchen, maybe, oh, I don't know, just, maybe doing the dishes, just whatever activity it is that takes you away from the table that you normally do. Visualize it, get a nice clear picture of it. Think about how you're feeling. Maybe you feel like really proud of yourself for stopping when you could have kept going, and just imagine how that feels. Now, why this is so fascinating to me is that what'll happen is when you're actually in the moment at the table, deciding that you've had enough and you're going to get up and walk away, your brain doesn't know that the thing you visualized was just a visualization. It actually thinks it happened, and now it has experience to draw from. So when you activate those actions, it says, "Oh, I know what she's going to do." And it kind of helps push you forward and continue through with those actions. I know it sounds crazy, it sounds silly, but your brain just doesn't know the difference between something you imagined and something that really happened. So the clearer you can make that visualization, it's going to help make you actually take that action when the time comes. So I hope that helps. All right. So let me get this wrapped up here for us. So combining that intentional planning with turning or tuning into our physical body, you get to take control of your food and your eating behaviors. And I know they may feel sometimes very much out of your control, but when you really practice that mindfulness and that intentionality, little by little, you start taking control back. Now, the last thing I want to remind you of, and this is probably more important than anything I've said here today, perfectionism is not the goal. Doing this perfectly, whether it's noticing when you're actually hungry and stopping at enough, You will never be perfect at it, and that is not the goal. The goal is it's really the process of noticing or becoming more aware and sometimes guessing if it's really a physical feeling that you're having that says I'm hungry or I'm satisfied. And you have to test it out and experiment. So there's absolutely no way to be perfect at this. And this is what trips up so many people. They get frustrated because after doing this a few days or a couple of weeks, they like, I can't find enough. I keep eating past enough. I think I'm eating too soon. I'm waiting too long. They start second guessing everything. There is no answer that I can give every person that says this is how it'll feel and this is what you'll do. I know that's what we want because remember, we've been trained for that. So you just have to be willing to let this be completely imperfect and treat it as a big experiment. But more importantly, you know what? We're all human. We have real thoughts, real feelings, and that all comes into play sometimes and really can kind of interfere with this being mindful about the foods we eat and the choices we make and feeling those physical symptoms. And that's okay too, because that's never going to change. So that does not play nicely with perfectionism either. So if there's anything that I can say that should be a goal, it's to keep perfectionism out of this process. All right. So, like I said, the goal is listening to your body. It's not to only eat when you're hungry and to always stop when you've had enough. And if you are telling yourself that, you're chasing perfectionism, which is kind of, in my opinion, the very thing that makes weight loss hard. Chasing perfectionism and thinking we have to do it right all of the time. I like to think of it this way. If I'm being mindful about my food choices and my hunger and satisfaction signals most of the time, I'll be eliminating most of my mindless eating behaviors. And sometimes I will decide intentionally to eat something for the pure enjoyment of it. And that's okay. And that's how you experience weight loss your way without restricting, without eliminating foods, without this black or white thinking. I love this idea of most of the time and some of the time. It takes all that pressure for perfectionism right off. So I hope that helped you today. And before I sign off, I have two quick reminders for you. The best way to get the latest information from Weight Loss Your Way is to subscribe to my email list. The link is going to be in the comments. And don't forget, I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. It is still available to everybody. You can grab my free Getting Started guide for Weight Loss Your Way. And a lot of the information I cover there is a much deeper dive into some of those earlier real talks that I mentioned in the beginning. So I'll also pin that post at the top of my Facebook page and leave you a link in the comments. So thank you for listening. And like I said, if you're on replay, leave leave a hashtag replay so that I know you were here and send me any questions that you have. All right. I will see you next week. Bye bye.